So hello, my name is Stefano Ritteri and I'm a nerd music producer and DJ and gears lot. We are in my studio in the beautiful East London, beautiful day today with FutureMusic, and I'm just going to show you a bit of my way of working. I'm going to show you the way I approach a remix and the way I like to play around with an iPad and integrate the iPad in my studio. And I'm working on a song which uses iPad and Cubase together. I hope you will enjoy it. I hope you will learn something, and yeah, thanks for watching. Alright, so now that Cubase is on, I want to show you a typical remix situation. This was from a few months back. I got a request to remix a single by Thelonious, which is one of the owners of the mighty Goma Records. And there wasn't much time. I remember the deadline was pretty tight, as often in the case. And this is the project. Let's go through the parts, what I received. Let's just play quickly. Obviously they sound pretty unbalanced. This is very rough. It's not mixed, but just to give you an idea of what I've heard. Okay.
You can't love me, what have you done? But you still got me like an altar, for everyone. You can't love me, what have you done? But you still got me.
So a couple of vocal tracks.
For everyone.
And that's how the song goes. And just goes on, and it has a couple of synth lines coming in. So yeah, I mean, I love to do remixes because what I normally do is I listen to it very quickly. I very rarely listen to the whole song because I don't want to be influenced by the arrangement or whatever the idea of the original song was. What I do is I mute all the parts, and I already know that I'm not going to listen to the drum sounds. I'm not going to listen to most of the stuff which I'm not going to use, and I just look straight away for vocals
Use eyes
and see if there is any synth line I might like. For example, this atmospheric and pads. I like really much the tone of it. Sounds really dirty. So what I do is basically I just pick up 2 or 3 sounds from it, and I start chopping them up, often just playing with the kick or stuff. I'll play you briefly what my remix sounds like. Goes on and on with different sound that I'm gonna show you in a minute. So basically, like always when I do remixes, I just literally picked up a couple of things I liked, which was this atmospheric and these pads, the vocal, because I wanted to have a little bit of the vocal, even though I just chopped it and used it very sparingly in the arrangement. And then I quite liked the bass sound. It sounds really dirty, it sounds really good. So basically in this case, I remember the way I started is I just, I picked up some very old school drum sounds. I wanted it to sound like a bit of like 70s feel. So instead of using very powerful drums or machine, which has that sort of more powerful sound, I went through my samples of old drum machines. If I solo the drums, you could see like there is a snare from a DMX, which I used to have years ago and I sampled. And everything is really, really simple. It's only about 8-9 tracks of drums, and I wanted to have this vibe, you know, really, really old school. And but I remember when I started, I actually only looped the kick, and I started playing around with the bass sample and the vocal and everything. And particularly with the bass, I just chopped a little 4 bars or 8 bars loop of the original, which again is this. And I've dragged, this is pretty cool, one of the things I like in Cubase, this sampler, Groove Agent, is very, very simple, it's very basic. It reminds me of the MPC days, which is how I started many moons ago. And I just put 4 bars, I just chopped every single stab of the bass and dragged and dropped it in here. So basically I have all the original stabs from the original bass line, but I was able to replay it the way I wanted. I just felt it was doing too many notes, you know, in the original. So I ended up just basically replaying it my own way. So that was the... Let me switch off the effect. So this is actually how it sounded, and it's just me playing MIDI notes of the sampler from the original. I kind of liked the line, but I thought it was a bit too dry, so I wanted it to have, again, a sort of an old school vibe, and I really love the rockabilly era and that sort of live sounding stuff. So straight away, normally I would put effects a bit later, but in this case I wanted to nail the sound of the bass because I knew it was going to be a big feature of this remix. So I straight away opened some combination of plugins. I never really planned what to do. So first thing is I've opened the Moog filter to check out if I could make it become a sub, but then I wasn't happy with it. So I just went for a different kind of sound. So I've opened the UAD Fatso, which is one of my favorites for bass compression, because it gives a sort of it's a very gritty sound, and it's barely compressing. It's more, you can see, it's more just giving it tone. Whenever the yellow line is going, it gives a bit of distortion to it, just a tiny bit. And then the majority of the sound was actually with one of my super favorite plugins, which is Guitar Rig. The combination of stuff that you can do with this plugin is really unbelievable. It's, you know, you can really go from subtle to completely crazy. And I started trying different combination of amplifiers and stuff. And so already just with the amplifier, it would sound a bit more lively, a bit more rocky, a bit more grunge if you want. And then I've added a very, very short slapback delay that would add a bit of dimension. Normally, the rule is you don't put delays, you don't put reverbs on the bass because of phase problems and everything. But I was always checking out with my phase analyzer that I wouldn't mess around with phase. And I really liked the idea of having a rocky sounding bass. So it took me some time to find a good combination. And again, the kick I've used in this occasion is from the DMX. It's very, very, or it's maybe a 707 sample. So it's very small. It doesn't have lots of low end to it. And actually, I rolled off most of the low end using one of Cubase plugins from Voxengo, which is included in Cubase. Because I didn't want the kick to be very prominent. I just wanted to be, very snappy, and the bass to do most of the low end. So once this sort of live vibe was going, I figured I wanted to use something else from the original, at least something else. And so I went for the vocals, which again sounded, we have many, many vocals here actually.
Got me, what have you done? But you still got me. Like an old toy for everyone.
So I like the tone, that it was going, too long in my opinion. So as I normally do with vocals, I just very lazily start chopping them up and playing with it completely randomly until I find a loop which I think could be interesting in the club. And this is the case. So I would play with it for a bit and see. pretty much all the vocal in my song is this chopped up part. These are just literally, if I remove the part, you could see that these are literally the little things, the little parts of the vocal, and I just take one part and loop it. I don't like it, and then I try to be very careful with the envelope. You can see that the envelopes are like the attack and the end of the sample are slightly moved, so I would avoid clips. Oh, they're all selected. See, like this would be the beep, because this is a longer, obviously. So once I find the chop I like, I'm just very careful to move the envelopes around the samples so they don't create. And yeah, in this case, this was very simple. I just looped that and it worked with the kick, you know, no big deal. And then a huge delay. And I think, no, actually in this one, there is no sidechain. I tried sidechain on this vocal, but because it's quite a pointy, I wanted it to sound like a little stab. With the sidechain, wasn't quite working. So I just kept it. And finding a good delay on it, like if I remove, this is how it sounds. Again, the amazing Blue plugin gives dimension. This is a slapback originally for bass, but I tried it on the vocal and it works. And then on top of it, there is, you can see automations here, which will happen randomly. You say, and this is because I wanted to create even more attention, and then I think at the end, and then there would be some little words which I've used as little effects, you know.
Pay the price.
With a very washed out delay dub, which I really love. I'm a massive fan of dub, and in my dreams I will sometime in the future produce a proper dub record with musicians and living for 6 months to a year in Jamaica. That's one of my biggest plans. But so far I'm using the dub sounds in my dance productions, and I love to use loads of delay and very long ones. It's still going. I will show you later my chain of effects, which I use very often. So yeah, in this case, I went through the bass, I went through the chopped up vocals, and after, you know, I thought, you know, it was strong enough with these two elements. Let me put the bass a bit down. And, you know, started adding, as I said before, very, very simple drum elements. I think, you know, I really love when, you know, with a remix or with an original, when you start, you know, playing a lot with a loop or something, and then you have that feeling that, you know, the one sound you found, the one loop will be the magnet to then write everything else. You know, that's when the composing starts, you know, when you find that little magic thing that makes you think, okay, I'm on the right way. And particularly with remixes, you're somehow forced or limited to use some of the sounds, you know, otherwise it wouldn't be a remix. So you're kind of forced to be creative with what you have there on the table. So in this case, I had many parts, but the major parts I wanted to use were the bass and the vocal. And then afterwards, I've added also some of the pads and the atmospheres to create, you know, this was also in the original. I just filtered it even more with the Moog filter and used lots of sidechain to create, you know, this effect of pumping, but this is used mostly in the breakdowns just to create this tension building. I spent a few hours on the main groove, moving the tiny, in this case, all the drums were straight away audio, so I like to spend long time with every single sound, moving and shifting the sounds outside of the grid. I normally use, you can import in Cubase as much as in Live and Logic, MPC, quantized stuff. It's something, this I've recorded myself many years ago from my own MPC. I've recorded the MIDI template and I've been using it forever, for more than 10 years. I really like the way the MPC moves stuff around a bit off the grid. And on top of that, I sometimes take off the grid completely and I would move the snares and the hi-hats manually until I feel that the groove is there. So I could spend a whole day just by making sure that the bass fits in between the little kicks and the little elements before I touch anything else. I don't remember how I've done this. This was some drum machine loop, which I don't remember how I made it, but it was a bit too, I already had some 16s sort of grooving, like real sounding. So I wanted to have some more. So to differentiate, to make it different, I've added, oh, actually, that's what it is. It's the same. It's the same hi-hat, but I was playing around with it and I've opened this amazing old school effect from UAD, which is a compressor, filter, EQ, reverb and delay. And I just filtered it a lot. And originally I wanted to use only this version and not anymore the other version, but the other version had a bit more punch to it, so I decided to use them both. So as you can hear, this one, to be a bit on the back, I've added simply one of the effects from the Sense, which is this reverb, again from UAD. So this has a little bit of a groove to it, and then on top of it, there is the original sample, and when they're then mixed together with sidechain, they do this jumping thing. So basically, I could have used only this, the original clean, super sidechained, but then I felt like I can go a bit dirtier than that. So just underneath, there is exactly the same, but it's been shifted by that plugin. I don't even know exactly what it does. I was just playing around with it. And probably there is, there is a delay and there is a 100% mix on some reverb. So it's basically shifted in time as well. So the combination of them creates what we hear, which looks like one weird hi-hat, but in reality it's the same hat copied twice and with different EQ and effect on it. So you have this sort of washed out. And I like, lately I like to add delays on hi-hats because it kind of, even though you can't really feel it, it kind of gives a little movement to it. So the only moment you feel it is when the song is actually, has a bit of like weird Prince drum machine sort of feel to it. It's sometimes it's wrong. What I would have done years ago, I would have exported it with the delay and then committed and then chopped up. For example, the parts when I have breakdowns, I would have chopped up the parts so we wouldn't hear the delay. But in this case, I wanted really an old school vibe. So even if there was a tail of the delay or the reverb, I wouldn't mind, It gives, and it's the same for every other sound, like when there is an automation of delay, in his. The delay. It kind of created this washed out hi-hat thing, which in this case worked. So instead of chopping it up and make it very clean, it all became messy and full of reverbs and delays. And with this record, with this particular song, I found this groove, I really liked it straight away. And then the decision was if I wanted to use other elements or if I wanted to add my own stuff. In some remixes, you end up using many elements of the original. In some others, I like to make it completely going in a different direction. In this case, this sort of old school vibe made me want to do lots of synth lines, like I love to program synth lines, and sometimes some of my songs are mostly sample based, some others, like in this case, I have many plugins open. In this case, I also was very curious about the sound of some of Cubase proprietary Cubase 7 synths, because at the time I just received the beta version of Cubase 7. So for example, some of the sounds I've done with Retrolog, which comes within Cubase, some others with usual suspects like Massive or Contact. And basically, if I start opening all of the sounds, there is quite a lot. For example, it's audio in this case. I think it was just a sample in Contact, a tiny little wah sound, which I looped and I exported audio probably because sometimes I like to commit to sounds. If I have everything open and I can modify it at all times, sometimes, you never finish a record. Whereas now I'm kind of like, if I really like something, I try to commit it like old school way when we had very limited hard drives or sampler. You had to commit and sometimes export because the sampler would have only a few seconds of sampling time or not many effects that you could use at the same time. So sometimes I just commit and I print to hard drive, to screen, like it was an audio piece I'm forced to use, and then I would play around with it with lots of automations afterwards. So in this case, this was like a little stab. If I go through the sounds, then now there is a siren that comes in from an instrument in Contact. And it's just this very, very old school sounding, and on top of it, I remember I've used just some EQ, just rolling off, I try to roll off all the bass frequencies for pretty much every other sound besides the bass and the kick, where I work a bit more precisely. But in this case, I just love the fact of how old school this sounded, and I've added a very long glide time. As you can see here, the glide time is really long. So in this, there is, of course, sidechain for a change. I'm just gonna open it. Pretty heavy. Drive and tube saturation from Cubase. There is no effects on top, but the two automations here. There is some heavy compression when it opens the filter, of course, and the filter is simply from Contact. This is, sometimes I like to go through the Contact modules because I haven't used them in a while. Reactor and Contact is so good. They have so many amazing instruments, and I'd sometimes open all the other stuff and I forget about, So the sound, actually the 8-bit and everything comes from here. Everything is, let me see if I can find out what automations we have. So you can see the automation here is on the actual filter of the synth. So it's just opening slowly. And in this case, it sounds very 8-bit and very old, but it's actually the tone of this particular synth. So in this case, when I heard it, I wanted to go for a normal synth and then put a beat crusher and distortion and everything. But in this case, it really was in the original sound. And it's, again, very simple. What happens is just automation of filter, which opens, and then automation of delay at the end of the part. And also to create, because it has this very slow ramp, to build up, I just found that starting from 1 and then adding it just gives this. I was kind of studying exactly where to start the next one. Then this interrupts. And then again, you know, these little things are all based on how long this envelope takes for the pitch to come out. So I spent some time to find a way to make this thing like sound pretty unique, like these two sirens. Is it one? Is it two? And then it's literally just this amazing instrument from Content, which has this super good sound, and just by opening the cutoff, does the whole job, really. Basically, in the structure of this record, because it's a bit of a weird record for me. It's not my normal house remix, but it's a bit more spaced out and it's very long. I wanted an arrangement where after this sort of little break, it wouldn't come everything together, but would be very stripped out to the point where after the breakdown, it goes. The drum is literally just the kick and the snare, and the siren goes in. So when you would expect the maximum impact, actually, it's just back. And then the filter of the siren is opening, the ad come in, and then I wanted something to anticipate something. So now there is Massive doing this little thing, because now there is a new feature coming in, which is this. I love arpeggiators. I really, really love arpeggiators. They make me happy all the time. But I can rarely use them because, you know, I find them in most of my records, they simply don't work, or they make it sound a bit too old schooly somehow. But in this case, old school was, you know, the vibe I was going for. So I was playing around with Retrolog, which is the synth that came in with Cubase, and has this really weird sound. And originally, this didn't have an arpeggiator on, actually. It's just the actual sound. And I played around with it a bit. I took off most of the attack. And then I just simply insert a MIDI effects, which I never use. For many years, I haven't used it in a long time. I used to do it, you know, all the time before. I've used this. It's a fairly simple, you know, arpeggiator, which is in Cubase, and it's used as a MIDI effect. And when you start playing more notes, it has I put it on a pretty much random vibe. And that in combination with such an old school sounding synth and quite a bit of processing, like my favorite plugin ever, the Space Echo, gives the atmosphere, the ambience to it. Auto pan, a bit of compression, and EQing again, just pretty much to roll off the bass. And I found like a chord which, together with the arpeggiator, would do this sort of backwards sounding, which in combination with Massive it gave me that vibe. So basically, what I've done is, that's the never-ending echo. There are three of them that will go for another 10, 15 minutes. Basically, what I've done is I started working on 32 bars of the bass and the vocal and everything, and then I started writing all these different atmospheres and different, textures. In this case, I didn't want nothing to sound really different from. I wanted every sound to complement each other, but to retain this very old school vibe. And so I remember working on this, which was the busiest part of the whole record, where all these synths are going on. And then the arrangement becomes very stripped down again, which is actually very, very strong in the club. I played this record a few times and many times, and it's really nice for me because it's not again the normal structure I would use. I wanted to take it a bit more artistic and wanted to make it sound more like a song, really, with an arrangement than just a club record. That's why it's fairly long for me. It's 7 minutes and 20 seconds at the end, and there's all these delays and stuff. And the way it worked, it basically I created a very different environment from stripped out, vocal and and little elements to full on 3-4 synths together. Even though the synth lines, they really complement each other, they don't do nothing crazy, they just add texture one on top of the other. And then after this main part where everything is together, it just goes back to be stripped down. And when these stripped down parts happens in the club, people, it's really refreshing somehow to go back, and it's quite brave. Like, I wouldn't have done it years ago. Once I would have built up such a strong part, then I would have kept it until there was time to basically change record. Whereas now I wanted to take the liberty of being like, no, let's go back in my own arrangement to zero, and it actually works really well in the club. Once I've had this main part of synths going on, I have then proceeded to do the arrangement. Normally the way I do is I tend to copy everything on a gigantic loop and then take off stuff. And I try to do it in a bit of a live way, as in I play everything, and normally that's the moment where when I finish writing all the parts, I would go out, have a few drinks, or more often I would have people coming here in studio, like pretty much every day, with drinks and using my Wi-Fi and my studio as their office. And normally that's when I start doing my arrangements, when I have people here, because I like to do it imagining the song, to be played for other people and not just for me. Sometimes, you lose a bit of the perspective because you're locked in a room making music every day. So sometimes you end up having a very good idea, but then you lose it completely with the wrong arrangement, and then you spend the whole day doing the wrong arrangement, and then suddenly you don't want to finish that song anymore because you just lose that momentum. So what I do normally, I try to write as many ideas and lines and whatever as possible, and then go out and have a drink or have a friend coming over here and have a few drinks, and then kind of imagine the song played in my sets or from another DJ, and unmuting stuff in a very live way, and then deleting quickly, and then having a very basic arrangement. And so I would do that. And then in this case particularly, I had a very, very short time also to do the mixing. So I didn't have time to just let it, sit there for a couple of days and come back to it. I pretty much had to do the mixing the same evening and just a bit of time the next day to check it. And then it was going pretty much straight to mastering. So in this case, I was lucky that the song is actually one of the simpler songs I made. It only has 24 tracks. Normally my songs have 40 to 60 to 70 tracks. I really go really deeply into details with little drum fills and drum sounds. But in this case, I thought, if I want to go for the old school vibe, let's pretend I only had 24 tracks, like an old school mixer, and let's see what I can do with those tracks. So the major part in this song came up with the automations. Automations are a process which I really, really enjoy, because they can make or break, again, a song. They are as important, in my opinion, as the selection of the sounds and the arrangement. A good automation on a sound can make it interesting for 10 minutes or can make it very boring for 2 minutes, and then the song is not going to work. In this case, the automations are pretty much all with, I normally open 3, 4, 5 FX channels within Cubase, and I load normally delays and weird reverbs, like this is a very, very old UAD reverb, dub delays, more reverbs, and another UAD favorite of mine, just an old school reverb unit. And in this song there is loads and loads of automations going on with delays, particularly, like all of these synths and vocals have sends and returns. You can see, for example, on the vocals, they are always open to delays, but then they go up and down if I show the automations. You see, there are quite a few in every. There is this church delay going, for example, on in this little breakdown. There is, for pretty much every element, there are loads of automations of pretty much delays, some filters, because I tried in this case to use these sounds that I had and to make them interesting and moving. You know, you create different ambience by opening long delay on one word or on one stab, and then suddenly, you know, you close it. For example, one example of that, which I just heard before when I was showing you, for example, in this little contact element, it normally has a delay on it that you can hear, but then at one point, I was automating contact before I've exported it. And where is it? What you're hearing now, we can't see it here because this again is me exporting it and having it. Was actually a mistake. I was having the MIDI parts from contact, which I don't have anymore, and I was automating with a delay, and somehow some MIDI part kind of overlapped, and then this became double. This wasn't actually planned, it was just a mistake. And when I've exported it, I thought, shall I re-export it, you know, fix? And I thought, no, you know, mistakes are good, you know, they're happy accidents. So in these parts, where it's already a busy part and everything is happening, this little thing doubling, in a minute, it wasn't planned at all, but because we are at the end of this like synthy esoteric part, I just felt it was another little accident that made this sort of crescendo going up, you know, up to here. So by doing automations and by doing them after many drinks, sometimes I end up doing some mistakes. I do them often with my mouse or with the mouse, or sometimes I just assign, you know, I use a machine as a MIDI controller and I just open and close dub-wise delays and stuff. But sometimes, you know, I overdo it. But, you know, unless it's a, you know, heavy mistake, which then you can go and correct and be very precise about it, I just leave mistakes like that one because they become part of the song and they become part of this weird, you know. And then opening even more delays on all of them. And this delay on the vocal just on that stab. And every single little stab of vocal has a different reverb or a different delay. So, you know, particularly with this style, you know, where everything is really spread out and it's very simple, I just found out that using good delays and good reverbs gave me all the atmosphere and all the changes I wanted for, you know, to create enough interest to not having to add many more effects, or like there is no big white noise build-ups or the, you know, the typical dance music elements, you know, to create tension. In this case, everything was played very subtly. I mean, this obviously now sounds a bit messy because all the files are not even mixed, but when it's all mixed, all the little changes and delays and reverbs really create a good atmosphere that keep interest to people, you know, in clubs. So in this case, everything is due to these 4 dub effects. And yeah, I mean, mixing this record was also not very complicated because, again, you know, less is more, and particularly with the mixing, you know, after I've been engineering for many years, and I remember mixing projects for other people where we had 70, 80, 90 tracks, and finding the space for all of them was pretty complicated and time consuming. That's why we felt we needed the best outboard gear, because it was more the, you know, the idea that, you know, the better the gear we had, the more we could add sounds and stack them up and layer. Layering is very important, of course. You know, there is lots of music genres wouldn't exist if we didn't start layering 3 different bass lines and be very precise. And still, it's something I would do in other songs. I would spend a long time and have 3 different sounds for bass layered up, and be very precise on the EQing and stuff. In other cases, and with a bit of experience, I'm learning more and more every day to commit to a specific decision. What we were talking about before is the fact that the composing, in my opinion, is the art of choosing. Is the art of choosing, whatever sound you're gonna choose for your kick is not just a kick. That is gonna determine. It's going to be, as I said before, the magnet for whatever snare will come on top, whatever bass will work or will not work on top of that. And it's the same for every synth line or snare. So the art of decision, of committing to good sounds from the very beginning, makes my life much, much easier in mixing process. With that said, sometimes I still experiment and I still open sounds which are not supposed to be drums and try to use them as drums, or use mic clapping, or sometimes I just plug my microphone and I record my friends playing around on my sofa, and I end up using those sounds in a sampler and they become something different. I mean, that's a creative side which it's still very good fun and I love it. But some other times, especially when you have shorter time, because it's a remix and you have a deadline, you want to commit to something which sounds good. And in this case, if I go through the different sounds, you could see that most of them, they don't even have much processing, or what they have is just a bit of EQing or envelope shapers or very simple compression on it, simply because these sounds, I made a selection of sounds and a decision which end up working particularly well in this context and with this style of music, which is this a bit more disco-y, old school sounding. Normally what I do is I tend to group my drums, simply because that allows me to have much less processing and much less effects open on the single sounds. So in this case, my group of drums has very simply a Fatso compressor, again one of my favorites for the tone, and a studio EQ just to roll off some of the subs from the drums. And normally I group the drum sounds because it's easier to do automations, for example, filtering them on a breakdown instead of filtering every single sound like many other producers. You just filter the whole group and that makes your life much easier. And I like to compress the sounds from the very beginning in a drum bus. In this case, the compressor is not working because the volumes are not the actual volumes of the mix, but I normally try to look for a little. Especially in this case, I like to go for quite a heavy compression on the drums. And I like the Fatso because I can filter out the low frequency, so it's not triggered by the kick, basically. It's not pumping with the kick, which is something I don't like. So Fatso is very convenient for that. I end up using always one on the master bus. That's my bus compressor mostly for most of my projects. Normally, I don't start a song with a specific compressor or a specific template. I always start with something different. I always start with different sounds, and that's the same for plugins and mixing. Like Fatso, I gotta say, it's very present. It's pretty much, almost all of my records lately. But sometimes I just open some different stuff just for the sake of trying a different compressor or some distortion unit on the master. Or sometimes I use parallel compression. So I would set up a bus and send my drums to a bus and have it set, have it super heavily compressed. And some other times, like in this case, I'm not bothered. And, I want to keep it fresh and fun. And I've been mixing it's been 10 years I've been an engineer for other people as well as for myself, and not to get bored, I've always looked for different ways of achieving the same result, which is a good sounding record. So I don't have a template. I just open always a completely brand new project in Cubase. I know that I'm going to have a compressor on the master because I like the gluing that it does. Most of the times lately it's been the Fatso, but can be as well a compressor from Cubase. Sometimes they work amazing, especially in Cubase 7. They really stepped up their game with the dynamics and the EQs. I really find that if I want, I can use just internal stuff, really. I don't need external. But of course, I love UAD. I've been loving it in the last 2-3 years. What they do is mind-blowing, in my opinion. It's obviously expensive, but you know, the power that you get, it's just unbelievable. And be able to open many of them. In this particular case, I was going for quite a gritty, old school, not very bright sounding record. So there is the Fazzo on the master bass with a bit of the warmth, which is nothing but it's just a compressor that works on the very high frequencies as much as the saturation of a tape would do. And so by you know, the more warmth parameter you put up, the more you're gonna cut high frequencies. And I actually like to cut loads of high frequencies in my records often. Normally I have a Pultec also from UAD set up, and as you can see, I'd give it a bit of thump in the 60s normally to have a bit of bass, but I also attenuate from the 20. I find the Pultec to be very gentle and very natural in the way it cuts a bit of the high frequencies. And I, especially if I'm working entirely in the box, I find it a bit ear piercing, some of the sounds, you know, even though, you know, I might look for good samples, I find that the sum of all these digital tracks, the summing that it does, the algorithm in Cubase, adds quite a lot of top end. Some people love it, I just find it a bit annoying. And normally I find that when I shave it off a bit with the Pultec, and then it's shaved again a bit more in mastering stage, it sounds a bit more like vinyl. It sounds a bit more, I like it more because it sounds more like what I'm used to, you know, like I grew up playing vinyls all my life and I've been making music for 15 years. And so that kind of, you know, like that kind of closed sort of, you know, not very bright sound is what I grew up with and is what I look for. So a little bit of Pultec, it's always, pretty much always present in my tracks, and a bass compressor, often the Fazzo. And then the Fazzo is normally present also in my groups, especially in the drums. Sometimes I also like to group the synths or the general samples. In this case, I didn't. Again, I was pretty much in a rush in this case. And I gotta say that the stuff sounded pretty much good to me, you know, without too much processing. Even if I go to the other sounds, you would see that, you know, in all the other synths, what there is pretty much always a roll-off of the bass. Everything below 100 or 200, I try to shave it off from all the sounds but the bass. And there is quite a lot of also delays and stuff on the actual sound, like in the Retrolog synth, the siren, sorry, the arpeggiator. That is just the arpeggiator and the main tone of the synth, which I worked for quite some time. And then I wanted to move it a bit, so here you go. I start opening a very short delay, courtesy of my favorite Space Echo. And then move it a bit around with Cubase Autopan, which moves it around. And what it does, I find it kind of ruins a bit the power of a sound. Like it takes off something and it puts it away from the center. So I love to use it, but afterwards I normally put a compressor, in this case UAD 1176, which is one of my favorite. I used to have two of the real ones back in the days. I love the tone of it. It's very aggressive, and as you can see, it's kind of going heavily in it, because what I've lost with the Autopan, I'm just gaining it back with a compressor, plus added distortion. This thing is very colored. And then, even though I shaved already the bass, I've done it again here, so it's double shaving, because sometimes one EQ is not enough. It doesn't matter what EQ it is. Sometimes you use combinations of them. Sometimes you do it for tone, like you might use one very surgical EQ to remove stuff and one very colorful one, colored one, to give character to a sound. So I sometimes use 2 or 3 EQs on the same chain of one sound if it's needed. You know, whatever works, you know. I've learned to, you know, I've learned all the rules when I studied sound engineering and when I was the nerd on forums and looking of how the big engineers have done. And now I'm kind of having fun breaking the rules, you know, doing my own stuff and doing stuff which I'm not supposed to, and, you know, but that creates my own sound, you know. Whatever works, really. Otherwise, it gets a bit boring, you know, if you just follow the rules. It just gets a bit boring. So in this case, you know, every sound, if I go through all the different synths, every sound will have a bit of their own delays or their own. Plus, on top of them, there are 4, main effects, which are heavily automated on all of them. When they're all together, we could hear the effects going on for many seconds. So sometimes I even open a sidechain, which is particularly for this song. The sidechaining was very important because I wanted to go for a bit of also French sounding stuff. And as we all know, French love their sidechaining thanks to Daft Punk. So in this case, if I go through all the sounds, I would go to the brand new channel street, which is another feature I love in Cubase, because I don't have to open, plugins anymore. It's already open pretty much in every sound. I just have to activate it. So if I go through the different sounds, we could see that they all are heavily sidechaining, because that creates this whole movement, especially when you have these super trippy delays and stuff. You want to have control. You want still the beat to come out, So the kick and the snare will drive the sidechain on everything else. And this constant trip, also on the delays and stuff, allows me to keep everything. Even though it's a bit wild, like if I listen to it, some of the automations are really crazy. Like some delays would go pretty much from bar 1 until the end of the record, but they're always controlled by sidechain. So I don't lose the pulse, the most important thing, which is the beat. And then, after doing, quick volumes and a bit of EQing and stuff, I would have a look at my spectrum analyzer, which, as others have pointed out on FutureMusic, it's a very necessary tool. I don't use it very scientifically. I use it mostly for, most importantly for the phase. What I really like to have a look at is this, and especially when you're using lots of delays and reverbs, this value can go below 0, and when that value goes below 0, it's trouble. It means that when it's gonna go mono, we're gonna lose many dBs of power. And I also have a mono switch in my monitoring system, so I can check it out. And what I do, that's actually a cool trick I've learned from a German engineer, Cubase, but I think every other DAW has it, as a nice function to make sure that your sound wouldn't go crazy. So say, for example, this case, say that I was using this and I was watching it, and now it's perfectly in phase, but say that I was watching it and it would go below 0 because some of the reverbs or some of the effects I've used simply are out of phase. That happens when you use spectral enhancement, whatever, stereo, spreader, when you want to go all crazy. What I would do in Cubase, but again, I'm pretty sure you can do it with every software, is you go on your normal pan, and instead of using a normal pan, you switch it to a stereo combined, which what it does, it allows me to tell him how wide I want. So what I want the sound to be. So for example, now I've reduced the sound, so it won't, even if I put a super stereoizer or whatever you call it, or a crazy delay, it won't go crazy pad, it won't go out of the speakers, so to speak, which is, it's a cool effect, but it would go up to a certain extent where I tell him to go. And the more I keep it in, within that spectrum, I would notice that this bar, if it was at 0 or below, would go up and up. So what I would do, I wouldn't put it too narrow, because I would still want, for example, a synth not to be in the center, but to be back there, because it's not one of the main features. But instead of being so wide up, it would be a bit less, but I would be sure at that point that if I put it in mono, or if it's played in a club in mono, which is more often the case, lots of clubs are mono, I wouldn't lose it. So sometimes you renounce to the super, stereo spread, but you go for a little smaller stereo image, but you retain almost all of the volume and the information in mono, which for dance music is absolutely necessary, because loads and loads of sound systems in clubs are in mono. So you don't want to make super trippy, amazing synth line and spend all of your time with crazy effects that you can have, like UAD make sums or whatever. There are many effects that you can use to do crazy stereo effects, and then you play your song in the club and suddenly that sound is below everything else, you lose it. So by using this trick of combined pan, you can tell it, yeah, just be, you know, as large as you want, but you know, keep it within a certain, you know, a certain limit, so the phase will straight away go up. So I use a spectrum analyzer especially for that. You know, it's also cool to check out, you know, your frequencies and make sure that your kick and the bass are working well, and you know what we all know. But for me, the most important element is the phase, because before I wasn't using it, and I used to spend one day on you know, making it sound really cool and with one gazillion little delays and stuff, and then I would play the record and mastered and everything in the club, and that sound would be really tiny, and I'd be like, why? Now I've learned that it's because of the phase. So keeping an eye on the phase and the spectrum gives me, you know, I mean, some sounds will go next to zero, but and you know, as long as they're next to zero and they're not below zero, we can still hear them in the club. So if I see that they're next to zero, I'm just gonna put the stereo balance a bit smaller, and then they're gonna be maybe halfway through, and halfway through it's good enough. Most mono sounds will be perfectly up there, but you know, we don't want to have everything mono. You know, we still want something. It's all about the balance. So stereo, you know, spectrum analyzer it's very useful for me for that sense. And yeah, in this record, yeah, pretty much that's it. You know, I just mixed it, and then the next day I came in the morning, had a little touch, sent it to the label. They loved it, thank God. Then I think it went to mastering the next day that I actually made it. I think it was the fastest master I've received. Like the next day in the evening, I received the master, and it was a Friday, so I was playing somewhere, and it was pretty fun to play, you know, a record I made the day before, already mastered, and it had very good reaction on the public. It's so much different from the vinyl time where we had to wait weeks or months, and yeah, now technology allows us. Sometimes, if you know, sometimes it still takes some weeks in between, you know, when you make the record and you get the master. But for that, I would do my little fake mastering. I would use software like Isotope or some UAD stuff, and make my own fake master, and then put it on a USB or burn a CD and bring it with me and be able to try it actually in the club. It's a great luxury. And yeah, I mean, there are many good points in still playing vinyls, many good sonic points, and we can stay here forever talking about what's best or what's not. But technology, one of the main things that technology allows us nerd producers at the moment, is to be able to play straight away something from the studio to the club, you know, with a little fake mastering. And, you know, sometimes it sounds really good already with what we can do with a bit of experience and good speakers, and softwares are really unbelievable, you know, and you can really try it straight away. So that's a very good point in technology. In this case, I didn't need it because it was mastered the next day and sounded good. So that was a lucky remix.